I still remember the heat of Rio that day in July 1944, how it clung to my skin like a second uniform. We stood in ranks on the docks, our green helmets gleaming in the sun, rifles slung awkwardly across our shoulders. Mothers waved from the crowd, handkerchiefs fluttering like white birds. Children shouted our names. My mother stood among them, her face pale, her lips trembling in a smile that wasn't real. I tried to look brave for her, though my stomach churned with nerves. We had trained for months in Minas Gerais, running drills under the mountain sun, firing rifles until our shoulders bruised, learning to march in step with men from every corner of Brazil. Some had never left their villages before. I had never been farther than São Paulo. Now we were bound for a war on the other side of the world. Cobras fumam, we joked as we boarded the ship. The cobras will smoke, the saying we had heard so many times, mocking the idea that Brazilians would ever fight in Europe. Yet here we were, filing up the gangplank, rifles clutched tight, proving that the snakes could indeed smoke. Someone shouted it from the line and laughter broke out, nervous but real. The crossing was long and restless. The sea stretched endless and gray, the waves tossing our ship like a toy. The air below deck was suffocating, filled with sweat, smoke, and the stench of too many men packed together. We slept in hammocks strung above one another, swaying with the ocean's rhythm. At night we whispered about submarines, about German U-boats lurking in the Atlantic. Each time the ship creaked or the engines shifted, I imagined a torpedo striking and sending us all into the deep. But life on board was not only fear, there was music, always music. Soldiers from Bahia brought guitars, their voices carrying samba rhythms across the deck. We clapped along, stamping our boots, forgetting for a moment that death prowled under the waves. Even the Americans who shared our convoy smiled and tapped their feet, though they did not understand the words. In those moments, with stars glittering above the Black Sea, I felt the strength of being among brothers. Days blurred together until at last land rose on the horizon. Naples. The city was a ruin. From the deck I saw buildings with their roofs torn away, streets choked with rubble, smoke still rising from places struck by bombs. We disembarked to the smell of salt and ash, our boots crunching over broken stones. I had imagined Europe as grand and old, but here it looked like a corpse. The people stared at us as we marched through the port. Children with thin faces and wide eyes begged for food, their cries echoing off shattered walls. I handed a boy a piece of hard biscuit from my pack. He devoured it before I could blink. Women watched us with a mixture of curiosity and despair, their clothes worn, their hands clutching little ones close. I thought of my mother back in Rio, of how she had worried when I left, and wondered if these children's fathers were still alive. The Americans were everywhere, convoys of jeeps and trucks, soldiers with chewing gum in their mouths and cigarettes in their hands. Their accents were strange, but they greeted us with smiles and slaps on the back. The Brazilians, huh? Welcome to the war, one said, grinning as if it were a football match instead of a battlefield. Our camp was pitched outside the city, in the hills where olive trees still stood despite the shelling. We pitched tents, strung up washing lines, tried to make a piece of Brazil here in the ruins of Italy. At night we huddled around fires, the cold sharper than anything I had ever known. The stars seemed colder too, distant and unforgiving. I lay awake that first night, my rifle beside me, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. Somewhere north, the Germans held the mountains waiting for us. I thought of home, of the warm streets of Rio, of the laughter of my sisters. I wondered if I would ever see them again. But fear was not all I felt. There was pride too, pride that I was here, wearing the cobra patch on my sleeve, standing among men who had left their farms, their shops, their families, to fight in a land they had only read about. Pride that Brazil had answered the call, that we were no longer just a distant country at the edge of the world. We were part of history now. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, the words echoed in my mind. A cobra vai fumar, the cobra will smoke, and tomorrow we would march north into the fire. We moved north in convoys of American trucks, packed shoulder to shoulder, helmets bumping as the vehicles rattled over broken roads. Dust billowed around us, stinging our eyes, settling on our uniforms until we all looked the same shade of gray. The drivers were young GIs, chewing gum and shouting in English, their radios blasting swing music we couldn't understand. We clapped along anyway, laughing, though nerves gnawed at our stomachs. The landscape changed as we drove. Olive groves, vineyards stripped bare by war, villages scarred with bullet holes and blackened walls. Everywhere we saw the signs of battle, abandoned trenches, burned out tanks, fields pockmarked with shell craters. It was no longer the postcard Europe some had imagined. It was a graveyard with roads running through it. When we reached Tuscany, the trucks let us off near the front lines. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and damp earth. American officers barked orders through interpreters, assigning us sectors, handing out maps marked with thick red lines. The Germans, they said, were dug into the mountains, clinging to ridges and valleys like wolves in their dens. We would patrol, probe their defenses, learn the terrain. The first patrol was everything and nothing like I imagined. We marched single file through narrow paths, rifles tight in our hands, eyes straining at every shadow. The mountains rose around us, steep and green, their beauty hiding danger. Each rustle of leaves, each crack of a branch, made my heart hammer. I expected ambush with every step, but the enemy did not show that day. Instead, we found silence. Villages deserted, houses abandoned, doors hanging open, as if families had fled mid-meal. Chickens wandered in empty courtyards. A dog barked from behind a ruined wall and then went silent. It was eerie, like walking through the shell of a world already dead. That night, in the farmhouse we used as a post, we sat around a lantern and whispered about what lay ahead. João, a joker from Bahia, pulled out a harmonica and played a samba tune. At first it felt out of place, too cheerful, but soon we were humming along, tapping boots on the stone floor. For a moment the war melted away, replaced by the warmth of home. The next day the war reminded us it was real. We were ordered to scout near the Serchio Valley. The terrain was rough, slopes covered in forest, gullies twisting like traps. Our boots slipped in the mud, our breath fogged in the cool air. Birds scattered at our approach, and I thought bitterly that even they had more sense than us. The first shot cracked like a whip. A tree splintered near my head. We dove into the dirt, hearts pounding, rifles clutched tight. Shouts echoed through the forest, Portuguese mingling with German. Tracers hissed through the trees. I fired blindly at the ridge, the recoil jarring my shoulder. Leaves rained down, smoke stung my eyes. It was chaos, men shouting, branches snapping, bullets tearing bark. I crawled behind a rock, breath ragged, and saw Paulo, a boy from Minas, lying flat, blood spreading across his sleeve. His eyes were wide, shocked, as if he couldn't believe he'd been hit. I dragged him back by his collar, my hands slick with his blood, until the medics pulled him away. The firefight lasted minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally, the Germans withdrew, melting back into the hills. We held our ground, dazed, ears ringing, our rifles hot in our hands. One of our men lay dead, 2 more wounded. For the first time, the war had reached out and touched us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark of the farmhouse. The harmonica silent now, Paulo's pale face burned into my memory. I kept hearing the crack of that first shot, the way it had split the silence of the forest. My hands shook when I tried to clean my rifle. I told myself it was just nerves, that every soldier felt the same. But deep down, I wondered if I would ever stop shaking. The next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, we buried our dead comrade in a shallow grave near the farm. We placed his helmet on the mound, stood in silence as the chaplain muttered prayers in Portuguese. Some of us cried, others clenched jaws and stared at the horizon. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, the knowledge that tomorrow it could be me under that dirt. Yet, as we marched again into the hills, I noticed something had changed. The jokes were fewer, the songs quieter, but there was a new bond among us. We had faced fire together, dragged each other through the mud, and survived. The fear was still there, but so was determination. We were no longer just boys from Brazil playing at war. We were soldiers now, and Italy was teaching us its lessons in blood. By September, the Serchio Valley had become our proving ground. The Germans held the high ground, dug into ridges and forests where every stone seemed to hide a rifle. The valley itself was beautiful in a cruel way, vineyards clinging to slopes, rivers glittering in the sun, but to us it was a trap waiting to snap shut. Orders came one evening. We would advance at dawn, probe the German lines, and hold the valley. The night before, no one slept. We sat in the farmhouse that served as our post, cleaning rifles, checking straps, speaking in low voices. João joked nervously about missing Bahian food, swearing he'd trade his boots for a plate of feijoada. Laughter rippled through the squad, but it was thin, forced. I tried to write a letter to my mother, but the words came out clumsy, my hand shaking. In the end, I folded the paper and tucked it away unfinished. Dawn came cold and grey. Mist clung to the valley floor as we moved out in single file, boots crunching on damp earth. The Americans had briefed us, pointing at maps, warning us of machine guns hidden in the hills. "They're tough up there," one GI had said, tapping the map with a cigarette. "Keep your heads down." His words rang in my ears with every step. The first shots came just as the sun broke over the ridges. Machine gun fire rattled from the hills, ripping through the mist. Bullets hissed past, tearing branches, thudding into the ground. We dove for cover, the valley erupting into chaos. Smoke grenades burst. Shouts filled the air, Portuguese, English, German, all tangled in the din. I hugged the earth, heart hammering, mud caking my face. João was beside me, cursing loudly, fumbling with his rifle. "Vai, vai!" our sergeant barked, waving us forward. We crawled, scrambled, fired blind bursts toward the ridges. The air stank of gunpowder and wet soil. A mortar shell landed nearby, the blast knocking the breath from my chest. Ears ringing, I blinked through the haze and saw Paulo, his arm bandaged from the earlier skirmish, staggering forward, rifle raised. He fired again and again until another shell burst, throwing him to the ground. I crawled to him, dragged him back, shouting for a medic. His eyes rolled back, blood soaking the fresh bandage. I don't know if he heard me calling his name. The battle stretched into hours. We pushed forward, then fell back, the line swaying like a rope in the wind. Germans appeared from foxholes, firing bursts before vanishing again. Every rise in the ground hid danger. My mouth was dry, my hands numb, yet I kept firing, the rifle bucking against my shoulder until I no longer felt the recoil. At one point, we reached a stone wall overlooking the valley. From there, I saw it clearly, the Serchio winding like a silver ribbon, smoke rising in columns, men darting like ants across fields littered with bodies. Above, the German machine guns still barked, cutting swaths through anyone who moved too boldly. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, a view I will never forget. Our artillery finally answered. Shells whistled overhead, slamming into the ridges. Trees splintered, earth erupted, and the German guns fell silent for moments at a time. We used those pauses to dash forward, stumbling into ditches, pressing ourselves against rocks. Each meter gained felt like a mile. By late afternoon, the valley was littered with smoke and silence. The Germans had pulled back to new positions, and we held the ground we had bled for. We gathered in small groups, exhausted, faces smeared with mud and fear. Medics worked frantically, bandaging wounds, carrying the worst on stretchers. I sat against the wall, rifle across my knees, lungs burning with every breath. João slumped beside me, his harmonica cracked in his pocket, his eyes wide and hollow. He didn't speak, none of us did. The silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. That night we buried our dead in shallow graves at the edge of the valley. We placed helmets on the mounds, muttered prayers in Portuguese, some men weeping openly, others staring blankly into the dark. When it was my turn, I placed a handful of soil on Paulo's grave, my fingers trembling. He had survived one battle only to fall in the next. I wondered how many of us would last another week. Back at the farmhouse, someone tried to start a samba on the harmonica, but the notes faltered, weak and broken. Instead, we sat in silence, listening to the crickets in the fields, the distant thunder of artillery echoing through the valley. The Serchio had baptized us in fire. We had marched in as boys in green helmets, grinning and choking. We left as soldiers who knew death by name. And tomorrow, the valley would call us again. By November, the mountains had swallowed us whole. The Apennines rose gray and jagged, their slopes buried under mist and snow. We dug trenches into frozen earth, pitched tents that sagged under icy rain, wrapped ourselves in whatever scraps of warmth we could find. Back home in Brazil, winter meant cool nights and rainstorms. Here, it was a living enemy, gnawing at our bones. Mud was everywhere, thick, sticky, swallowing boots with every step. Rifles rusted overnight, boots stiffened into stone. Fingers cracked and bled in the cold. Our rations were thin. Tins of American Spam, hard biscuits, bitter coffee boiled in dented pots. We joked that the Spam would outlive us all. João said he dreamed of feijoada every night, and once when someone opened a can of beans, the smell made him cry with laughter. We learned to make our own warmth. Fires were forbidden after dark, so we huddled together under damp blankets, our breath misting in the air. At night we sang samba softly, voices blending into the howling wind. Even the Americans in nearby positions leaned in to listen, though they didn't understand the words. The songs carried us back to Rio, to Bahia, to the beaches and streets we had left behind. The Germans were ghosts in the hills. Some nights their artillery rained down without warning, shells exploding in the valleys, shaking the ground beneath us. Other times, silence stretched so long it became unbearable. Every shadow in the trees, a possible sniper. Once on a patrol, a single shot cracked from a ridge, dropping one of our men where he stood. We returned fire blindly, but the sniper vanished, leaving only his echo. Still, there were moments of strange beauty. One morning, after a night of snowfall, the valley lay under a perfect white blanket. The sun rose, turning the peaks gold, and for a few minutes it looked untouched, as if war had never reached here. We stood in silence, shivering, rifles in hand, and no one spoke. Then the shelling began again, and the illusion shattered. The cold seeped into our spirits as much as our bones. Morale sagged, men snapping at each other over scraps of food, over damp boots left too close to the fire. But there was also laughter. Once during a lull, we built a snowman outside the farmhouse post, sticking a helmet on its head and a rifle in its twig arms. João painted a mustache on its face with charcoal. Even our sergeant cracked a smile before ordering us back to work. December brought worse. Snowstorms buried our trenches. Winds howled so fierce our tents collapsed. We spent hours digging ourselves out, hands numb, clothes soaked. Frostbite took men's toes and fingers. The medics worked constantly, their tent lit by lanterns late into the night. I saw Paulo's replacement, a skinny boy named Miguel, brought in with blackened fingers, his hands trembling as they wrapped them. He never complained, only asked if someone would write to his mother. Christmas came with no feast, only the same tins of spam and hard biscuits. Yet someone smuggled in a bottle of cachaça, and we passed it around the fire, the warmth burning down our throats. We sang louder than usual that night, voices rising against the cold, a stubborn reminder that we were still alive. One of the Americans joined in, trying to clap along, and we laughed until tears froze on our cheeks. The Germans never let us forget where we were. On New Year's Eve, as we tried to cheer ourselves with another round of songs, shells whistled in from the hills. Explosions ripped through the valley, scattering earth and snow. We scrambled for cover, the night lit with fire. When it ended, one of our men lay still, his body half buried in the snow. We dug him out with numb hands and buried him before dawn, the snow falling silently over his grave. By January, we had learned to live with the misery. We slept in shifts, rifles always within reach. We patrolled the ridges, boots crunching on snow, eyes scanning every tree line. The Germans were still there, waiting, but so were we. Each day survived was a small victory. One night, as I stood guard, I looked up at the stars glittering over the frozen peaks. For a moment it was almost peaceful. I thought of home, of the warm nights in Rio, of my mother's cooking, of the sea breeze. I wondered if I would ever feel them again. Then I heard movement in the trees, raised my rifle, and the war rushed back into my chest. Winter in the Apennines was not a battle of guns and glory. It was a battle of endurance, of mud, frost, and silence. It tested us more than bullets ever could. And though we cursed it, though we shivered and suffered, we endured, because the cobra still smoked. and we would keep smoking until the mountains gave way. The name Monte Castello still makes my chest tighten. A mountain stronghold, rocky slopes crowned with German bunkers, it rose above the valley like a clenched fist. Our commanders told us it was the key to breaking the Gothic line, the path to Bologna and beyond. To us it was a wall of stone and fire that seemed determined to break us first. We went up for the first time in late November. The cold bit deep, the wind cutting through our coats. Snow clung to the slopes, turning the climb into a crawl. We advanced under cover of artillery, shells screaming overhead, bursting against the ridges. Yet the Germans were ready. Machine guns chattered from pillboxes, mortars rained down, and the mountain itself seemed to spit fire. I remember charging up the slope, my boots slipping on ice, bullets cracking against rocks. João was ahead of me, shouting, "Vai, vai," as if his voice alone could push us higher. The air was filled with smoke and screams. A mortar exploded near us, throwing mud and snow into the air. When it cleared, 2 men were gone, just gone, as if the earth had swallowed them. We tried again the next day, and the next. Each assault ended the same. We clawed our way part way up, only to be thrown back by relentless fire. The mountain did not want us. Every night we limped back down, shoulders sagging, our numbers smaller. The medics' tents overflowed, bandages soaked red, men groaning through the night. By early December, the mountain had become a curse whispered in every tent. "Castello will kill us all," one man muttered as he lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Yet orders kept coming, and we kept climbing. One day, I found myself pinned behind a rock with João, bullets ricocheting around us. He laughed, actually laughed, as he fumbled with his rifle. "When I get home," he shouted over the gunfire, "I'm never climbing another hill again, not even to fetch water for my mother." His grin faded when a shell burst nearby, showering us with stone. We crawled lower, our hearts pounding. The mountain gave us no mercy. Paulo's replacement, Miguel, who had survived frostbite, fell to a sniper's bullet before we reached the halfway mark. I helped carry his body down, his face pale in the snow, his blood marking the white like spilled wine. That night I stared at his empty bunk, my stomach twisting. We had come so far, crossed oceans, only to die nameless on a foreign hill. Yet through the despair, something hardened in us. Each failure made us angrier, more determined. The Americans respected us, nodding grimly as we returned from another failed assault. "You boys keep coming back," one said, shaking his head. "Tough bastards." We clung to that word, tough, as if it could carry us through. By late December, after yet another attempt, we were nearly broken. The cold was merciless, supplies thin, morale frayed. Some wondered aloud if we would ever take Monte Castello. But when the order came to prepare for another assault in February, no one protested. We knew what it meant. Either we climbed that mountain or we died trying. I will never forget the funerals that winter. We dug graves in frozen earth, our breath misting as we lowered bodies wrapped in blankets. Helmets marked the mounds, silent sentinels against the snow. The chaplain's voice cracked as he prayed, his words carried away by the wind. Each time we buried another comrade, I felt the weight of the mountain pressing on my chest. In the quiet moments, we found ways to keep going. João's harmonica played again, shaky at first, then stronger, carrying samba into the frozen night. We shared cigarettes, stories of home, promises of peace when we returned. I held on to those moments like a lifeline, reminders that we were still men, not just shadows climbing into gunfire. Monte Castello was not just a battle, it was a test of our courage, our endurance, our will to stand where so many had fallen. We failed it again and again, but each failure bound us tighter together. We were no longer just soldiers from Brazil, we were brothers forged in ice and fire. As December closed, the mountains still loomed above us, untaken, mocking, yet I felt something shift within me. The cobra still smoked, and when February came, I swore Monte Castello would finally burn. February brought us back to Monte Castello. We had climbed it before, again and again, only to be thrown back in blood and snow. But this time something was different. The brass told us the artillery would pound the mountain before we went in, that we would not fight alone. American and British units would coordinate with us. The whole valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting. On the morning of February 21st, the sky shook. Our artillery thundered for hours, shells screaming overhead, smashing into the ridges. The mountain roared, smoke billowing like a storm. We crouched in our positions, helmets pulled low, the ground trembling beneath our boots. For the first time I saw fear in the mountain itself. When the order came, we moved, rifles tight, bayonets fixed, breath steaming in the cold. We advanced in waves, clambering over rocks, boots slipping on icy slopes. Smoke still hung thick, but machine guns cracked from bunkers hidden in the cliffs. Bullets whined past, snapping branches, chipping stone. Men dropped around me, their cries swallowed by the din, but we kept climbing. Vai, vai, João bellowed, his voice hoarse. His harmonica was long gone, but his spirit carried us. We scrambled from boulder to boulder, firing bursts, ducking low, then surging forward again. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline pushed me higher. German mortars whistled down, explosions tearing gaps in our line. Dirt and snow rained over us, the shock waves rattling my teeth. I pressed against the frozen ground, heart hammering, then forced myself up again. Ahead, a machine gun spat fire from a stone nest, pinning us. I saw two of our men go down, their bodies twisted in the snow. Our sergeant motioned. We flanked left, crawling through scrub, mud freezing on our uniforms. I gripped a grenade, pulled the pin with shaking fingers, and hurled it toward the nest. The blast silenced the gun. Smoke cleared, and we surged forward, bayonets flashing. Inside the nest, the Germans were gone, either dead or fled. For the first time, the slope ahead looked climbable. Hours stretched like days. Every ridge taken revealed another. Every bunker destroyed led to more fire. But we pressed on, shouting, shooting, climbing. I saw João tackle a German soldier behind a rock, both men rolling in the snow until João's bayonet found its mark. He staggered up, face pale, eyes hollow, then kept moving as if nothing had happened. By late afternoon, we were near the summit. The last defenses crumbled under artillery and our relentless push. Smoke stung my eyes, my ears rang from constant explosions. I fired until my rifle clicked empty, then loaded again with numb fingers. The Germans fought fiercely, but we were not the same men they had faced in November. We were harder now, hungrier. We wanted this mountain more than they did. And then suddenly, it was over. The firing sputtered out, the ridges fell silent. Our flags, green and yellow, rose against the gray sky. I sank to my knees, chest heaving, staring at the summit we had finally claimed. Monte Castello was ours. The valley below echoed with cheers. Men embraced, some laughing, some weeping openly. Helmets were thrown in the air, rifles raised high. For the first time in months, joy surged through us like fire. João hugged me, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "We did it, Irmão," he whispered. His voice broke, and I felt my throat tighten. But amid the celebration lay silence too. Bodies littered the slopes, friends, brothers who had climbed beside us and would never climb again. We buried them in the frozen earth, marking their graves with helmets, saluting as the chaplain spoke. The victory tasted of ashes in my mouth, sweet and bitter all at once. News spread quickly. The Brazilians had taken Monte Castello. We had done what others had failed to do. The Americans and British praised us, clapping our backs, raising cups in our honor. "The Smoking Cobra, 1G," I said with a grin. "He's biting hard now." We laughed, but our eyes were heavy. We knew the cost. That night around the fire, João played his harmonica again. The notes were shaky, but they carried into the cold night air. We sang softly, voices mingling with the wind. For a moment the mountain loomed silent and still, its fire spent. I thought of home, of Rio's beaches, of warm nights, of my mother's cooking, and felt a pang deep in my chest. Monte Castello was a victory, yes. But more than that, it was proof that we belonged here, in this war so far from our shores. We were no longer boys from Brazil fumbling in foreign mud. We were soldiers of the FEB, and the world now knew it. As I lay down to sleep, my rifle beside me, I whispered to myself the words we had carried since Rio. "A cobra vai fumar. The cobra will smoke." And tonight it smoked atop Monte Castello. Montese was unlike anything we had seen before. We had fought in forests, on mountains, in frozen valleys, but this was different. Montese was a town with narrow cobbled streets, stone houses, and church spires. And in April 1945, it was also a fortress. The Germans had dug into every wall, every cellar, every corner. We marched in under artillery fire. Shells tore through roofs, smoke coiling into the spring sky. The streets echoed with explosions, the cries of civilians mingling with the thunder of war. Doors hung from hinges, windows shattered, dogs barked in terror. And still we advanced, rifles tight, hearts pounding. The first house we entered was empty. Furniture smashed, plates broken, family photos scattered across the floor. A child's doll lay on the ground, its porcelain face cracked. João picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then set it gently on a shelf. "Poor souls," he muttered. His voice was almost lost beneath the roar of gunfire. But the next house was not empty. A machine gun cracked from an upstairs window, bullets chewing the wall above us. We dove into the dirt, plaster raining over our helmets. Our sergeant barked orders, and we stormed the building. Grenades cleared the upper floor. The blast shook the walls, and when we climbed the stairs, the gunners were gone, their weapons silent. That set the rhythm of Montese, house to house, room to room, cellar to cellar. Each step was a fight. Germans fired from behind broken furniture, from church towers, from holes smashed in walls. We fired back, our ears ringing, our lungs burning from dust and smoke. The streets filled with chaos, Brazilians shouting in Portuguese, Germans yelling in German, civilians screaming in Italian. In one alley, I saw a woman clutching two children, her face streaked with soot. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. I shouted, "Vai! Vai!" pointing her toward safety. She ran, dragging the children, bullets snapping around her. I never knew if she made it. The battle lasted 3 days, 3 days of constant thunder, of running low on ammunition, of carrying the wounded through streets slick with blood and mud. Juan was hit by shrapnel on the second day, his harmonica crushed in his pocket. He groaned as the medics dragged him away, clutching his side. "Don't let them keep my harmonica," he gasped with a weak grin. I promised him I'd find another. By the third day, Montese was rubble. The church spire toppled, the houses reduced to shells, but the Germans pulled back at last, leaving us bloodied but standing. We had taken the town at a cost. 30 of our comrades lay dead, hundreds wounded. Helmets lined the roadside graves, silent testimony to the price of victory. Yet victory it was. Our commanders praised us, the Allies saluted us. For the first time, the world saw the Cobra smoke in full flame. We had faced the Wehrmacht in a brutal, grinding street fight, and we had won. After Montese, the war seemed to unravel. The Germans were retreating everywhere. We pushed north, chasing them through valleys and villages, our boots pounding roads littered with abandoned equipment. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they fled. The front moved so quickly, it felt as if the entire Reich was collapsing before our eyes. In the final days of April, we rounded up prisoners by the thousands. Hardened German soldiers, men who had once seemed invincible, now laid down their rifles before us, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Some were little more than boys, others gray-haired veterans. I looked at them and thought, they are just men, no different from us, only caught on the other side of history. I remember one group in particular. We captured an entire company in the hills, nearly 150 men. They marched past us, rifles slung over shoulders, hands raised. Their officer, a tall man with medals on his chest, stopped before our sergeant, saluted and handed over his pistol without a word. The silence was heavy, almost respectful. For a moment the war felt like it had already ended, but it wasn't over yet. Bologna fell in late April, its streets filled with cheering civilians, throwing flowers, shouting "Viva I Brasiliani." We marched through the city as liberators, though the joy felt strange after so much blood. Children clung to our uniforms, women kissed our cheeks, men offered wine. I drank, I laughed, but inside I felt the weight of Montese still pressing on me. The road north stretched open and rumors spread. Germany was finished. The war would end any day. We were exhausted, battered, but hope flickered in us like a fragile flame. Soon, we told ourselves, we would lay down our rifles. Soon we would go home. Yet even in that hope, I carried the faces of Montese, the woman and her children running through gunfire, Juan clutching his harmonica, bleeding in the dust, the helmets lined on fresh graves. Montese had shown us victory, but it had also shown us its cost. The news came like a gust of wind through the ranks. The Germans were surrendering. At first, we didn't believe it. We had been told 100 times that the war was nearly over, only to wake to more artillery, more patrols, more graves. But in late April and early May 1945, the rumors hardened into truth. Whole units were laying down their weapons. Entire battalions surrendering to us in the valleys and hills of northern Italy. I will never forget the first group. We had just secured a ridge outside Fornovo di Taro when a line of German soldiers appeared on the road, white flags tied to sticks. They marched slowly, their boots dragging, their rifles slung across their backs. At their head walked a gray-haired officer, his uniform immaculate despite the dust, his pistol holstered. He stopped before our sergeant, raised his hand in salute, and handed over the pistol without a word. Behind him, more soldiers followed, dozens, then hundreds. By the time the column ended, there were nearly 1,500 men, all surrendering to us, Brazilians from a country most of them probably couldn't find on a map. I stood by the roadside, rifle slung, watching them pass. Some looked ashamed, eyes downcast. Others stared at us with hollow defiance, as if refusing to acknowledge defeat. But most looked simply relieved. Their war was finished. It felt unreal. For months we had fought these men, cursed them, feared them. They'd seemed like shadows in the mountains, wolves in the fog. Now they were just men, tired and hungry, handing over their rifles like schoolboys giving up toys. One German, barely older than me, caught my eye as he passed. His lips trembled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. I didn't raise my rifle. I simply nodded. More came the next day and the next. By the time it was over, the FEB had taken more than 20,000 prisoners. The Americans clapped us on the back, grinning. "Not bad for the Smoking Cobra," one said. We laughed, but the sound was uneasy. Victory had a strange taste. We herded the prisoners into makeshift camps. The sight was surreal. Long rows of Wehrmacht soldiers sitting in fields, helmets at their feet, waiting for instructions from boys who had grown up playing football on the beaches of Rio. Some of the Germans tried to talk to us, their words tumbling in broken Italian or French. Others sat in silence, staring at the ground. A few smiled grimly, as if glad to be alive no matter who their captors were. I remember a conversation with one prisoner, a young man with blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. He spoke a little Portuguese. His father had been a sailor, he said. He told me he had been fighting since 1941, first in Russia, then here. "Too much death," he muttered, shaking his head. "I am glad it ends." For a moment he was not my enemy. He was just a man who wanted to go home as I did. The civilians celebrated as if a curse had lifted. In villages we passed, Italians poured into the streets, cheering, waving flags. Women kissed our cheeks. Children pressed flowers into our hands. Old men shouted, "Grazie, Brasile." I carried a little girl on my shoulders once, her laughter ringing as bells tolled across the valley. It felt strange. Hours earlier we had marched through ruins, stepping over rubble, rifles ready. Now we were heroes, greeted with wine and bread, with tears of gratitude. Yet even in victory, the ghosts of war lingered. At night I still saw Montese in my dreams, narrow alleys filled with fire, João clutching his harmonica, the graves lined with helmets. I woke with sweat on my skin, my rifle always close. Victory could not erase what we had seen. On May 2nd, the official announcement came. All German forces in Italy had surrendered. Cheers erupted in the camp. Men embraced, shouted, fired rifles into the air. Some wept openly, their tears cutting through grime. I sat on a crate, staring at the sky. The war, at least here, was over. I tried to imagine what home would feel like, what the sea would smell like, what my mother's voice would sound like after so long. The thought made my chest ache. That night, as the camp quieted, João, his side bandaged but healing, pulled out a new harmonica. He played softly, the notes drifting into the cool air. Others joined, clapping, humming along. For the first time in months, the music did not sound like defiance. It sounded like hope. The Germans were finished. The war was ending. We had come from the other side of the world, and somehow, against all odds, we had endured. Still, I could not help but wonder, after all this, what would we carry home with us? After the surrender in Italy, everything slowed, as if the war itself had exhaled. The guns were silent, the skies clear of bombers. We still carried our rifles, still patrolled the roads and guarded prisoners, but it felt hollow now, like actors playing out a script whose ending everyone already knew. The prisoners filled entire fields. We marched them in lines to the camps, 20,000 strong. They handed over weapons, helmets, belts, even watches. Some looked defiant, others simply relieved, their shoulders sagging as if the war had drained every last ounce of strength. I walked beside one column, listening to the shuffle of boots and the murmur of tired voices. I thought of how they had once terrified us in the mountains, hidden behind machine guns and mortars. Now they were just men in rags, staring at the ground. The Italian villages erupted with joy. Everywhere we went, church bells rang, flags flew from windows, and crowds surged into the streets. Children pressed flowers into our hands, women kissed our cheeks, men clapped our shoulders. "Viva il Brasile!" they shouted, their voices cracking with relief. I smiled, I waved, but part of me stood apart, watching through a haze. I thought of the ruins of Montese, of the doll João had found in a burned-out house, of the civilians who had not survived long enough to celebrate. On May 8th, the news came. Germany had surrendered unconditionally, victory in Europe. VE Day. The Americans fired flares into the night sky, explosions of color blooming over the valleys. Our camp erupted into cheers. Men embraced, danced, passed bottles of wine until they were empty. João played his harmonica, its notes soaring above the din. Even the officers smiled, raising tin cups in toasts. For the first time, there was no fear in our voices, only release. But amid the celebration, I felt something heavy inside. We had won, yes, the war was finished, at least in Europe. But victory was not pure. It was tangled with grief, with the faces of the men we had buried, with the screams that still echoed in my dreams. When I closed my eyes, I saw Paulo Miguel, the nameless boy who had fallen in the snow, the rows of helmets on fresh graves. Their silence was louder than the cheers. In the days that followed, we lingered in northern Italy, waiting for orders. Some of us patrolled, others guarded camps, but most of the time we sat in the sun, staring at the mountains we had once feared. Without gunfire, they looked almost beautiful. João joked that he might stay and become a shepherd, so long as the sheep don't shoot back. Laughter rippled through us, real this time, not forced. For the first time in months, we laughed without guilt. Letters from home began to reach us. My mother wrote of Rio, of how the city had erupted into parades, of how newspapers printed our victories as if we were heroes in a story. She said she prayed every day for my safe return, that she dreamed of seeing me walk up the street again. I held her letter in my hands until the paper softened with sweat, reading it again and again by lantern light. One afternoon, I wandered into a village market. The war had ended, but the scars remained, bombed-out houses, fields riddled with craters. Yet there were signs of life, women selling bread, children playing in the square, men hammering boards across shattered windows. An old Italian man pressed a loaf into my hands, shaking his head when I tried to pay. "Grazie," he said simply. His eyes were tired, but they held warmth. In that moment, I felt something shift. We had not only fought, we had given people the chance to begin again. Still the question lingered, what would come after? We had lived in mud, in snow, in fire. We had buried friends, stormed mountains, seen cities burn. Could we return to beaches and football, to samba and laughter as if nothing had happened? Or had the war carved too deep into us? As May turned to June, orders finally came. We would be going home. The camp erupted again, louder than on VE Day. Men packed their gear, swapped stories of what they would do first, kiss their wives, drink cachaça, eat feijoada, sleep in real beds. I smiled at their joy, but I also felt a pang of unease. Home felt like a dream, distant and fragile. That night, I stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The mountains glowed in the fading light, peaceful at last. I thought of the boy I had been on the docks in Rio, waving to my mother, joking with the others about cobras smoking. I was not that boy anymore. None of us were. The cobra had smoked, and in the fire we had been changed. The war was over. But for us, the campaign would never truly end. The day we boarded the ship back to Brazil, the sky over Naples was clear. The war was finished, the rifles stacked, the prisoners guarded by others. Our uniforms were faded, our boots worn thin, but we marched with heads high. The dock bustled with soldiers from every nation, but our green helmets, marked with the Smoking Cobra, seemed to glow brighter in the sun. We had carried that patch across mountains, valleys, and ruins. Now we carried it home. The crossing felt different from the one that had brought us here. Then the ocean had been a place of dread, every wave hiding a submarine. Now it was a bridge. We crowded the deck, gazing west, joking about the first meals we would eat, the first kisses we would steal, the beaches we would run to. João leaned against the railing, his harmonica pressed to his lips, sending a samba tune into the salt wind. Men clapped, sang, danced in tired boots. For a moment, the ship became Rio, and the war felt like a bad dream receding into the sea. But dreams are never so simple. At night, as waves rocked us to sleep, I woke sweating from memories. The thunder of artillery, the cries in Montese's alleys, Paulo's blank eyes staring from the snow. I lay in my hammock staring into the dark, wondering if home could ever feel the same. Weeks later, the coastline appeared, green hills rising from the sea. Rio. A cheer erupted on deck, loud and raw, as men surged to the rail. Church spires gleamed in the sunlight. The Christ, the Redeemer statue spread its arms wide, and ships in the harbor blasted their horns. For the first time I felt tears on my cheeks. We were home. The dock was a sea of faces. Families waved, flags fluttered, bands played samba so loud it shook our bones. Mothers pushed forward, eyes searching desperately. Children perched on shoulders, wives clutching handkerchiefs. As we disembarked, the crowd surged around us. I heard my name, high and trembling, and there she was, my mother, her hair streaked with gray, her arms wide. I ran to her, dropped my pack, and she clutched me as if I were still a boy. She wept into my chest, her tears soaking my dirty uniform. For the first time in years, I felt safe. We paraded through Rio's streets, thousands cheering, confetti raining from balconies. People shouted our names, offered flowers, pressed bottles of cachaça into our hands. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and joy. Yet as we marched, I caught sight of the empty spaces among us, the gaps where Paulo, Miguel, and so many others should have been. Their absence was as loud as the cheers. At night, the city lit up with music and dancing. We crowded into taverns, drank until our heads spun, sang until our throats were raw. Strangers clapped our backs, kissed our cheeks, toasted to victory. But amid the laughter, I saw eyes like mine, haunted, distant, staring past the celebration into memories of fire. We smiled, we laughed, but we carried the war in us still. In the weeks that followed, life resumed. Some went back to farms, others to factories. João limped home to Bahia, harmonica in his pocket, already talking of planting cassava again. I returned to Rio, to my family's small house, to the familiar smell of beans and rice. My mother clung to me as if she feared I would vanish again. My sisters asked endless questions, their eyes wide, their laughter light. I answered as best I could, though I spared them the worst. How could I tell them about Montese, about the graves in frozen soil, about the boy with blue eyes who had surrendered to me, trembling? Some truths stayed locked inside. Sometimes, walking along Copacabana beach, I watched the waves roll in, the sunlight glittering, the gulls crying overhead. Life was here, warm and bright. Yet in the crash of waves I sometimes heard artillery. In the cries of gulls I sometimes heard the shouts of men in the Sergio Valley. The war had ended, but it had not left me. People called us heroes. They pointed at our cobra patch with pride, told stories of the Brazilians who had fought in Italy. I nodded, smiled, lifted glasses in toasts. But when I was alone, I thought not of glory, but of the faces of friends left behind, of helmets marking graves far from these shores. And yet there was pride. We had gone where no one thought we would, fought in lands most Brazilians had never seen, faced the Wehrmacht in their strongholds, and endured. We had shown the world that the cobra smoked. One evening, as the sun set behind Rio's hills, João visited me. He played his harmonica softly, the samba drifting on the breeze. Children gathered to listen, clapping in rhythm. My mother smiled from the doorway. For the first time since Italy, I felt something lift from my chest. The war would always be part of me, but life, warm, stubborn, beautiful life, was here too. The cobra had smoked, and though many of us were gone, those who returned carried its fire home. We were no longer the boys who had left Rio.